Alright, so what I've decided to do today is create a little test demo reel of the open source scan converter using my Super Nintendo as the primary example. Now the game I'm going to be testing today is Super Mario All Stars plus Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo. Now what I'm going to be demoing here is primarily just how good the open source scan converter looks on a monitor display. And I'm using the Super Nintendo because it's one of my favorite retro consoles. Now, my open source scan converter settings are relatively simple, and I know that the Super Nintendo has various resolution options depending on the game, and you can configure those with the open source scan converter menu, but I'm not quite tech savvy enough to nail down an exact perfect setup. But luckily the open source scan converter, or the OSSC, makes things a little easier by offering just generic settings for simpletons like me to use. So in this case, I'm using a simple line quadruple, or line 4x as it's labeled in the menu, to output a resolution of 960p. Now 960p is a pretty off-spec and awkward resolution for many modern displays, so your TV may not even accept it. Most computer monitors should be able to handle it, and a lot of 4K monitors should accept the signal easily because I believe 4K is an integer scale of 960p. Now my TV happens to support it, and it's quite nice because it's the closest thing to 1080 I'm going to get on a native 1080p display. Yeah, and if you can't get 960p to work on your display, then maybe 720p will work, which is line tripling. But primarily here, I'm going to be doing 9 quadrupling, which is 960p, because that's 4 times the resolution of 240p, which is the primary resolution that the Super Nintendo outputs. Now, what I was talking about earlier about specific resolutions that the Super Nintendo supports, and then the OSSC using generic settings for people like me, well, that mainly has to do with the aspect ratio. With line quadrupling, the OSSC allows for a generic 4:3 mode, which basically just scales the image to fit a 4:3 aspect to slap on your display. And for my case, it works quite nicely. Now, a lot of people who play Super Nintendo or big Super Nintendo aficionados may be a little frustrated with this footage here, because maybe it's not exactly how they think the Super Nintendo should look. But for someone like me who only really desires super sharp pixels, I think it looks really nice. Especially when I'm already used to emulator quality, because for a while I have been playing retro games on PC emulators. These generic settings work just fine for me because I get the sharp pixels that I want, and I get the benefit of playing on original hardware. So I have very little to complain about here. Now, another thing I wanted to do was test out all the different scanline features, because one thing I've also been recently getting into is playing on an old CRT, which in my case are a little hard to come by. Not anyone is really carrying a CRT nowadays. You can't really find them at thrift stores around me. And I don't think any hospital or radio station, has some lying around. Because that's another thing I was told is, just find a hospital or a radio station that just has a few lying around. Because it was very common equipment for those professions. But luckily I had a friend who carried his old CRT for the longest time and just never got rid of it. And, well, he never uses it, so he loaned it to me, and it's really nice, because it's a late, I want to say it's actually an early 2000s Sony Trinitron, at exactly about 26 inches, so it's really nice. It's that perfect size, big enough to satisfy the eyes, and it's small enough to still be able to carry around with one person. Though I really do not recommend one person hauling a 26-inch CRT, because I don't know if any of you use CRTs or had to haul one around, but God, those fuckers are heavy, man. Like I can carry mine, or well, my friends, pretty simply enough by myself, but doesn't negate the fact that they're heavy as shit. But I really enjoy playing on a CRT because, I don't know, visually, it's a style that I, have nostalgic feelings for. I didn't own an HD TV till around late 2013, around there, because that's when I got my first HD TV. Actually, no, it was 2014. 2014 was when I first got my first HD TV, and before then I was using a CRT. So, playing on a CRT is just something that's very natural to me, something I enjoy a lot. And another thing I'm enjoying is just the scanline look of a CRT, because I don't know, it's something that I don't really think a lot of people appreciate enough these days, because for sprite-based games like these, developers would use, scan lines and glowy phosphorescent lights on a CRT to, hide the imperfections of pixel art like this. Now, of course, it always looks good when it's super sharp and crisp, but, many CRTs hide a lot of blemishes that really do make the games age a lot better for a lot of people, especially when you're using poor video signals like composite, which looks absolutely terrible on an HD TV, but if you play on a CRT, composite actually looks alright. It mainly depends on the TV, and my TV actually handles composite really well. But that's the thing I want to be demoing here with the OSSC, and that is various scanline settings. So, grab my OSSC remote here. I'm going to be swapping out different settings for scanlines. Just 1 second. And here we go. Now, it's relatively subtle, as you can imagine, but this is mainly because of a new feature that the OSSC now supports, and that is hybrid scanlines. Now, hybrid scanlines are just, regular ass scanlines, except it makes an attempt to sort of lighten the brightness of the scanlines depending on the color surrounding it, which is sort of to create a bloom effect, so to speak, on brighter colors, especially white. Because white on a CRT blooms out so much, it basically hides the scanline if you're sitting far away. And that's basically the effect that the hybrid scanlines try to replicate, because near darker colors, you get deeper, darker scanlines, and brighter colors like the white gets very faint gray scanlines. And perhaps this is not the best game to test it out. I find it looks really nice for Nintendo 64 games, because Nintendo 64 games have a natural blurriness to it. If you don't have an Ultra HDMI for your Nintendo 64, and if you're just using RGB, the N64 natural blur, including the scanlines, actually does make for a really cool effect that looks really nice. Now, the thing about scanlines that I've been hearing a lot is that they look better in line triple mode, because while the natural softer image of 720p combined with the scanlines, sort of replicates that professional CRT look a little bit better, because line quadruple is just a tad too sharp. But the thing about my case here is that my TV actually has a dot-by-dot mode, or pixel perfect, where it fits every single processed pixel on the display. In the recording, it's kind of stretched to fit a generic 1080p 16:9 frame, but on my TV right now, the picture is a little smaller, but I get sharper pixels to compensate. And another thing is that, at least for my case, when using 720p, sure, the scanlines are a lot bolder, but they're not quite uniform with how they're aligned on my particular display. But line quadruple mode, and to an extent line double mode, I think is a little bit more appropriate for scanlines, because, well, the idea with scanlines is that you're taking a 240p resolution and you're making it fit on a 480i display. So when doing that, you're basically, when 240p is on a 40i display, you're basically only seeing half of the display because every other line just is non-existent. The black lines, the scan lines. And that's the effect that, we're trying to replicate here. But the scan lines in line triple mode, for me, just don't quite appear uniform. And to tell you the truth, it's also the case with line quadruple mode. It might show up in the recording, but for my dot by dot mode on my display, scan lines in line quadruple mode actually do look even and deep and, well, really nice. The only problem with scan lines, for the longest time has just been, well, if they're all completely dark and black, it washes out the picture considerably and just makes it a little bit too dark and colors look a little too desaturated. But that's where hybrid scanlines come into play, and fix up those blemishes to make scanlines look really nice, no matter what line multiple you're using. And my settings here is basically scan lines are at 100%, meaning they're all as deep as they can, but then hybrid scan lines are at 50. Or actually, I might get that backwards. I think it's 50% normal scan lines, 100% hybrid scan lines. The hybrid scan lines, the percentage being, how deep the effect goes. Well, let me just finish up this level here, and I'll go ahead and check. And again, this is probably not the best game to demonstrate it. Like I said, N64 games look really nice, but, let me double check, because I'm pretty sure it was... Okay, yeah, scanline strength is 50%, while hybrid scanlines is at 100. So, and this is the end result. Now, I fiddled with it plenty of times, and these are the settings that satisfy me the most. Your mileage may vary, but, that's why the option is there. And normally I wouldn't really use scan lines practically in a practical situation like this, because, let's face it, since I have a CRT, if I really want the scan line look, I'll just play on the CRT, and I get the benefit of having zero lag on a CRT. Now granted, the OSSC negates basically as much lag as a video processor like this can do, so any inherent lag is done by my TV, but, many modern TVs are actually considerably pretty fast, so it doesn't really matter to me that much. Plus, I'm not that sensitive to input lag at all. Like, people say that the NES Virtual Console on Wii U has really bad input lag, and, maybe there is. Maybe there is. I wouldn't argue that, but I did manage to actually beat Mr. Dream and Punch-Out on the Wii U. Now, granted, I was playing on a CRT because... I don't know if you remember, but the Wii U actually still has analog inputs, so I was able to hook the thing to a CRT. But I digress. Maybe it's different on an HD display. Now I went ahead and turned scanlines off because for an HD TV with super sharp pixels like this, I generally prefer not to have scanlines. If it's just, I don't know, it's whenever you're in the mood for that kind of look. Some days you want scanlines, some days you don't. And again, for me, I actually prefer it with the N64 because of the N64's natural horizontal blur. And yeah, so just playing some Super Mario All Stars. The copy I have here on Super Nintendo aged very well. I do not know who the previous owner is, but either they really took care of the game or they barely played it at all and it was tucked inside of a closet for most of its lifespan. Who knows? It actually makes me sad because I have a couple of friends whom I've known since middle school who keep a stash of games in their garage tucked in boxes, and I don't know, I kind of find that to be I don't know. I don't know. It just makes me a little sad because, you know, the games that they have, you know, the market value for those has gone up quite a bit. They have such mainly N64 games for me, but they have Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. I believe they have Mario Kart and the original Super Smash Brothers. Now, go to any locally owned used video game store and motherfucker. And those N64 games, you know, they've gone up quite a bit in price. I have a local used video game store near me, and something like Mario Kart 64 is like 50 bucks. And, you know, the thing is, like, yeah, it was probably that much when it came out, but it was also brand new in a box with manuals and shit, and, you know, it was modern. But now it's just used with probably a ripped sticker and just poorly aged. That's another problem that I've been facing with buying used retro video games, is poorly preserved sticker labels. But I digress. And again, they keep it in boxes in the closet. And, you know, frick, I offered. I put down a price, and I not really put down a price, but I made an offer, you know. Told them pick a price. Fuck. I told them pick a price, and I'd pay it, and I'd gladly take it off their hands. But, you know, it's just, you know, when someone has the right amount of nostalgia for something, where they're willing to let it rot in a box, fuck, but don't want to give it away. It's like, okay, but damn, I'd play that. Because there's a certain joy with playing a video game on its original hardware, like I'm doing here. And that was, for me, the original joy with RGB video and video upscalers like the OSSC. You know, just to get an image that looks really nice like this. Because, yeah, I'm used to retro games looking this sharp thanks to PC emulators, but now I have the baggage of actually playing it on a console with the actual controller with very minimal input lag. There's something special about it. Because I can take that same console and plug it into my CRT and play it that way with no lag. And then, of course, emulators. And when it comes to the Super Nintendo, emulators, Super Nintendo has been treated a lot better than most other consoles, mainly the original Nintendo. You know, when I first started playing Super Nintendo, it was on a Nintendo Wii with the Wii Virtual Console. And even though the game library for the Wii Virtual Console is a little limited, actually it's a lot limited, but I don't think people give enough credit to just the execution of the Virtual Console itself on a game-by-game basis. Because, you know, nowadays, you know, when a game is re-released, or when a bunch of retro games are re-released, you know, it's most likely just using a simple, easy to use, all-in-one emulator that works with everything. But with the Wii Virtual Console, each game is actually its own specially tailored emulator to ensure highest accuracy possible. And one area where they did this was if you played your Wii on an old CRT, then you were using the SD-TV video option of the Wii supports, which is, well, 480i. But when the Wii is set to 480i, then retro games that use a 240p resolution will actually output a 240p resolution. Now, this was really nice because it allowed CRTs to output the game, well, how they would be on a console. So if you had good Wii cables, then in a sense, it was the first time gamers got to experience what basically high quality RGB would look on a CRT, assuming if your CRT in question accepts some kind of RGB video option like component or something like that. And mine does, so that's why it's really cool. If it's composite, well then, it's composite on a CRT. But again, it basically feel like the original. So for SNES games in particular, look really nice. What was really cool, actually, is fan emulators on the Wii. Like those fan-made Super Nintendo emulators like SNES 9X or something like that. It was really cool in that regard because they did the same thing, where if your Wii was set to native, or if the emulator was set to native resolution, it was basically just doing whatever the heck the Wii itself was doing. So it was outputting the games in a 240p resolution, just like how the Wii's Virtual Console does. So, if you're savvy with Nintendo Wii emulators, you have that additional compatibility there. Not to mention that you can set your Wii to 480i and then pass it through an upscaler like this one, play a Virtual Console game, and basically get a high quality, sharp image like this, but on a Wii, on your HD TV. Even though, to tell you the truth, the Wii actually upscales 240p games quite nicely if it's set to 480p for an HD TV display. Anyway, I think I'm gonna finish up this airship here and call it a day. Sorry for going silent there, I'm just listening to some stuff that's going on upstairs. Anyone else ever do that? You're kind of in your own train of thought, but then all of that gets cut off because you actually hear a conversation happening in the next room and you just blatant curiosity forces you to pay attention and listen. Because, you never know, you might be involved somehow. And then you actually are, and then you find out you're in trouble, and it's like, well, shit. I always hated these Monty Mole fuckers, because it's like, sometimes they never respawn after you kill them, but then there's times like these where they constantly respawn. Actually, going back to Nintendo Wii's 240p feature for Virtual Console games, it's actually kind of disappointing that it never really exploited that for any other potential re-releases. For example, right here, Super Mario Bros. All Stars. It was re-released on the Wii. However, it would not output in 240p, only 480i or 480p. So if you're playing on a 480i display, you would be displayed in 480i, so you wouldn't get any scan lines or anything like that. You would just get the, good old-fashioned 480i flicker that I bet a lot of people love a lot. Well, anyway, I think I'm going to call that good. I think that's enough fun for today, enough voice recording, so I'm just going to go right ahead and hit stop on the video recording, and then I'm going to hit stop on the audio recording. Alright, that was fun. Bye-bye.